right, welcome to Your Time, Your Money, the show where your time is just as valuable as your money, and we know that. Adam, excited to be in the room with you today.
Excited to be here.
And today we have kind of a topic, I think, that confuses a lot of people.
Yeah.
Maybe they've heard of it, maybe they haven't. Perhaps they don't even know what the acronym means, but,
Right.
ESG investing.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we'll shed a little bit of light on it. It's not meant to promote a specific fund. It's not meant to promote a specific investment philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just to outline what it is, maybe some of the areas to be concerned of,
Yep.
and some of the areas where you can benefit from it as well.
Yeah, a lot of times, the buzzwords get out there, and people kind of think, oh, I got to jump on the bandwagon. But a lot of it is just what we're saying here is getting an understanding of what it is.
Yeah, being in the industry over 23 years, I mean, you went through the tech bubble, and we went to tech funds and that creation, and you've heard all the different cycles through. So, this is another cycle of investing that's out, in the economy, and we want to address it so that clients know that it's out there and what it is. So I'll let you do the honors. We'll get started. It's your time.
Your money.
Great. So, let's talk about ESG and what it is in general. ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance. And what this refers to is a theological investment in companies that perhaps are maybe more morally in line with your social view or environmental view or governance view.
Right.
It basically has guidance to how fund managers can orchestrate their portfolio, supposedly, right? And I think what's important to understand is each of those letters in that acronym, ESG, have different guidelines as far as how a fund manager can structure an ESG portfolio, whether it's a mutual fund, ETF, or whatever it might be. Environmental, I guess, would be maybe the first thing to look at. And that would include, right, maybe companies that have a low carbon footprint, right, because that's very popular now.
Yep.
Work less in the oil industry and maybe less in natural gas, renewable energy.
Low emissions
standards. And, and there's a million little rabbit holes we can chase on the environmental end.
Right.
But, that's generally where they're gearing their recommendation towards, right? Social end would be companies that promote equity, inclusion, diversification, diversity within the workplace.
Yep.
Maybe more HR type issues.
Sure.
Right. More theoretical, like progressive views. Right. And then governance. Things that promote things through the federal government that are more regulated. Have less impact on the environment, bigger strategies. That type of stuff. Yep. So,
and just to take a quick step back. A lot of times people might think, oh, I'm interested in ESG because that speaks to me. In these capacities of these three spaces that you just mentioned, someone is more socially conscious of what's going on out there in the world. This becomes attractive to them conceptually, right?
Yeah, and to your point, if somebody's getting into it for the S in the ESG, they want to make sure that the investment they're investing in is geared towards the S and not the E and G, because they could technically totally avoid that S section, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But still be ESG because they're in one of those three spaces.
Right.
Yep. And I think one of the things too listeners need to understand is how fund managers pick the funds in there can really, I guess, create some confusion. Right. There's three different ways. There's best in class. There's themed investments, and then there's exclusionary investments. Okay, so think of it like this. Best in class means that a fund manager can put in almost any type of investment they want as long as they're the top one in that category. So you think ESG, right? A lot of times people refer to like low carbon footprint, blah, blah, blah. There could be an oil company in there.
Right. Yeah, usually wouldn't think so.
But because that one oil company has maybe one initiative or one less refinery than another, or one less, quote unquote, non-green attribute, they could be in there because they're best in class.
Right.
There could be another company that has a large carbon footprint in there because they're best in class in another sector. So investors go into these blindly saying, oh, well, I don't want to be in, high carbon areas, climate change area, blah, 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 whatever. But because the way it's structured is best in class, they may be.
Right.
Because that's how the fund manager structured it. right? So it's a little deceiving, right?
Yeah.
And our regulatory bodies even come down on ESGs because of that and how they promote it,
Right.
and how they push it as a product for investors to buy,
Yep.
right? And there are good fund families and investments out there that don't walk that line
Mm-hmm.
and go straight, hey, these are the only companies we're going to deal in because we're going to stick to this. But you got to know the difference between them.
Right. Right.
Right.
Another component to that too is the rating system. There's a rating system, much like it's similar to what you might think of like a credit score or a bond rating system. There's a rating system, but it can be easily swayed. Swayed. It's nice.
New terminology.
That's all right. Can be easily swayed based on just small things that a company might all of a sudden institute a recycle program, and all of a sudden they go up in a rating. And it's just understanding why did it go up in a rating?
Yeah.
So they are putting recycle bins around their office now.
So you could have the highest rated company that had the most move towards
Right.
ESG supposedly not being an ESG based traditional company.
Yep.
Just because they changed their corporate policy.
Correct.
And one may have been internal, and they may have introduced an equity, inclusion, diversity program in their HR department.
Right.
Maybe so nothing changed in their environment or in the world or whatever, but they went up
Yeah.
5 points or whatever that
Yeah.
rating system is
Yep.
in the mind of the examiner. So hey, now they can be put in that
Right.
mix of funds, right? And I had went back to those 3 ways best in class, single themed. So that would be maybe a ESG that's single themed. So these are all companies that work within the environment,
Right.
or all that work within social. Right. And I think the most interesting, or the one that maybe refines it more towards where a client wants to be, and that's the exclusionary. And that's where there's a corporate policy within the fund or the investment that says we're going to eliminate companies that deal in tobacco.
Right.
That we're going to eliminate or exclude companies that have military or weapons, or
Yep.
and that's where you're removing the things that a lot of times people don't want in their program,
Yep.
and they're okay investing in the other things.
Mm-hmm. And I know, I'm sure you have too, right? There are clients out there that specifically will bring that to the table when we're meeting.
Yep.
I don't want to be in a mutual fund that has X, Y, or Z in it. And that's just part of the way it's been forever. But
yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes you see people that they say, "Oh, I only invest in companies that don't have this," and
Right.
you look at their ESG model,
right,
and then you look into the funds, and lo and behold, all those things are in there,
right,
because of the confusion
Yep.
centered around how fund managers can bring assets in there.
again, bringing the understanding.
Yep.
out. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And fund managers can use looser standards by playing that gambit. Best in class, single themed, exclusionary, whatever it might be.
Right.
They can have a very loose rein on that, and that's why the industry is kind of cracking down and regulating it. I remember the SEC chairman came out, and she kind of talked about this issue of being kind of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of times companies were charging higher internal fees because of the governance that they have to do, the scrutiny, but they weren't changing their portfolio. There were a couple larger companies where they were just rebranding their large cap fund, and people were buying. They had a net inflow of cash into it because they rebranded it ESG,
Wow.
and it drove revenue for the company, but it didn't really change the internals of the portfolio too much.
You brought up an interesting point before we went live here. You brought up an interesting point in regards to pure ESG performance, historical performance versus other ESG performance.
Yeah, a lot of times the pure performance of a lot of the companies and investments that don't have the carbon footprints, that limit their fuel resources and things along that lines, a lot of times they struggle in competing against the performance of companies that don't have ESG policies. Right. But when you look at a lot of ESG portfolios, a lot of times they'll outperform their peer group. Why? Because that gray area with fund manager wants to compete, right? So they're bringing in technically non-ESG companies to improve the performance of the portfolio.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, oh, these funds are outperforming. And you look into the x-ray of the fund and you say, well, they're outperforming because a lot of the companies are not.
Right.
What, in common sense terms, people would say ESG.
Right.
Technically or on paper, the fine line, that yeah, okay, they're in there because it's best in class or
Right,
whatever,
right.
scrutiny
Yep.
that they're doing. And, it creates a lot of uncertainty for clients,
Hmm.
but for those that, are very meticulous about researching what the investments are, there are some choices out there.
Yeah.
And there are some companies that only deal in those types of things. And, ESG, it's a new word. It's a new thing that's, kind of been bantered out, but ESG came through. It was a UN speech or UN, kind of memo that went out in 2005.
Hmm.
So it's been around since 2005. It never really caught steam
Yep.
until about 2020. And BlackRock, one of the largest investment companies in the world, put out this kind of warning that, like, hey, if you're a company that's not going to do these social environmental things, we're not going to throw money at you and bring you into our portfolio. So a lot of companies said, ooh, well, that's a large part of our shareholders,
Right.
large mutual fund bases.
Yeah.
So it kind of, was a push forward of this philosophy
Right.
that,
Well,
really changed companies' attitudes.
and you think about what was happening in 2020, a lot,
Yeah.
right? I mean, socially, we had COVID going on, among many other factors of both social and, governance concerns.
Yeah,
So,
one thing that was fascinating is in 2020, 401ks limited or lessened ESGs in their 401k plan because they wanted to make sure that the investors in those plans had the best opportunity or chance for better return, right? And at the same time, lawmakers on different political side or whatever,
Right.
Basically came back and said, well, we need this in there for social change, and it was this conflict,
right.
right? So it was more of an ideology versus an investment methodology, and the two really don't match, right?
Right.
I mean, investments is math, paper, profit, right? Ideology doesn't necessarily mean profit.
Right.
So what 401ks were saying was, hey, let's limit these because we want to take the investment methodology to make sure we're doing our due diligence, right? Because the Department of Labor, a lot of other regulatory bodies put out guidance, best interest.
Yep.
Well, how could you necessarily do best interest if you know that the profit's on one side and it's not necessarily on the other, right? So there was a conflict of this ideology from the political level versus the market. Because in reality, ESGs probably would not exist in an open and free capital market where profit drives it.
Right.
Right now, and until the technology catches up to make, energy and that type of stuff more, cost effective and better for a portfolio. Not to say that it won't down the road, but right now, when you do the math, most of the profit companies are not technically ESG
Right.
centered.
Right.
And that's even big ones that you might know. I mean, most ESG companies that have the highest holdings are like the tech giants like Microsoft, Apple, that type of stuff. Well, why is that?
Right.
Right? I mean, we're talking manufactured computer parts with lithium batteries with, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But why is that? Is it because maybe the S and the G part of the ESG ranks them higher?
Right.
Because they do more from a social aspect or from a ideological aspect than, I don't know, industrial.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, everything's got to be made in a plant.
Well, and that's the thing, right? We have the quality of an ESG could be determined upon the laws that are passed in the country that they're based, right? So if they say, okay, you need to lower your emissions by X%, and a company happens to be either already doing that or they start doing it because they're being, by law, have to. Again, these are the types of things that will often push the quality of these of the ESGs. So
yeah, when we see that in the international markets more so than the domestic markets.
Right.
I mean, the international markets, a lot of the investment in mutual funds are geared towards ESG more so than anything else.
Yep.
And so I guess long story short, investors really need to be cautious when they're treading into a investment that is more regulatory driven than more economic driven.
Right.
Right. Profit and loss statements, that's a little bit easier to bank on.
Yep.
Right. safe to say that Walmart's going to be around for a while. Right? Do we know what their profit's going to be? Do we know what their loss is going to be? Not from a year-to-year standpoint, but I mean, common sense tells us that if they went under, we're all in trouble.
Right.
Right? Versus maybe a company that has an ESG agenda that's maybe a smaller company that goes into this model, and it might not be the best company in that sector.
Right. Yep.
So from an investor standpoint, we're not saying don't get into them. We're saying that if you're going to get into them, consult an advisor, let us do the due diligence, let us look through and see how are the fund managers orchestrating this portfolio, and are they doing a best in class versus something that's maybe exclusionary or something in the middle of the road or more in line with what a client wants to have happen. And it takes a lot of research to make sure that you're putting it into what it is that you want.
Right. And just because something is buzzing out there, whether it's the cryptocurrencies of the world or ESG, you want to make sure that you're doing the full homework on what you're looking to purchase.
Yeah, and as of diversification, it doesn't need to be every part of your entire portfolio.
Right. Yep.
You know what I mean? There's other assets there that are ESG sensitive, I guess you would say, right? Commodities, just a simple savings account.
Yep.
Right. I mean, what's a savings account at a local bank?
Right.
How's that destroying the economy?
Right.
I mean, destroying the climate or whatever it might be.
Yep.
So you want to have diversification even within those models and that strategy as well. So, and as always, if there's questions, clients can always call in. They can email in. They can schedule an appointment with the SA Group.
What's that number?
Yep, it's 844-444-YTYM for Your Time, Your Money. You can find us at yourtimeyourmoney.net for your net worth. And as always, we're at 43 British American Boulevard, Latham, New York, 12110. And then the last thing is just please like and subscribe, share on social media, and keep those questions coming in. This is actually one of the topics that was sent in, so we want to make sure that we're getting some timely information out there. And as always, it's your time.
Your money.